Okay, so Progress, you recently sponsored a survey and it called Human-Centered Software Design, a State of the Marketplace report. And I think the sort of headline finding was that there's a bit of a disjoint when it comes to the difference between sort of intent and action for that. But perhaps before we even do that, it'd just be good for those that don't know, if you could just give us an explanation of what human-centered software design is, and then we'll,
Yeah, absolutely. In the simplest terms, human-centered software design is keeping the user and their needs at the forefront, kind of as the North Star for software developers. When you're thinking about the digital experience, and that can be web apps, that could be websites, that could be all sorts of different tools, understanding that your users have different needs, understanding the humans behind the technology is incredibly important. And that's where things like accessibility and inclusivity come into play. And those both are not just, they're regulations and laws requiring or requirements around accessibility, but even more so, it's the right thing to do, right? And we know, and what we found even, that we were validated in the survey findings, that when you do get it right, when your websites or your applications are easy to use, when they're accessible, when they're inclusive, you have stickiness, right? People stay on the sites or within the application. You have higher customer satisfaction, which usually results in higher revenue and better business outcomes.
Yeah, and as I say, I think that the headline finding was the fact that there's a big commitment to the idea of human-centered software design,
right?
But the sort of intention to use that approach doesn't quite get to the actual practical. There's sort of a bit of a disjoint between what people want to do and what they end up doing. Is that fair? Right. I mean, then if that is right, what are you understanding? Did the survey explain what's going on, why that disjoint?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact, I mean, the last 4 years have been very interesting in the software space, right? Humans' reliance on technology as a result of the pandemic just skyrocketed, right? We had apps and websites that were used for, convenience in the past, all of a sudden became apps of necessity. And with that, our thirst and appetite as a society for that continued reliance on technology has only grown stronger, even as the pandemic is in our rearview mirror, right? So we see that there are far more applications, even with the introduction of generative AI, right, or the rise in popularity and the democratization of that. We're seeing more and more people relying on this technology, and so the rest of the development space hasn't caught up with the fact that there's this need for accessibility. There's a requirement that we have it. There's a need for a better user experience across the board, but there's such a demand for the digital experience to be connected, to be this bigger thing, that the technology, the development side of it has to catch up. And one of the things we saw was that retrofitting is very challenging, right? That's one of the things that the survey told us, and we knew that. Probably a prime example, my daughter's high school has a website where I can go and check on her grades and her absences and things like that. And when I look at the site on my mobile device, there is actually there's an icon that allows me to enable accessibility features and functionalities. The problem is that it can only be placed in 4 different places on the actual application, and every time you move it, it covers a critical piece within that application, right? So that is a prime example to me of a accessibility where the heart was in the right place, the idea was right, but it was retrofitted, right? And it ended up causing more problems than it did helping. And so when we look at something like that, you have to pause and say, there is a need. We know there's a need. I think we had 98% of our respondents said that they know that there's a need. But how do you fit that into your existing development, right? You can't retrofit, or if you do retrofit, there are a lot of other considerations that you have. So there's a lot of complexity there. So there are a lot of key considerations that developers and development teams have to make when they're doing something like that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we are. That's the state of the industry right now, for sure.
And are we talking something as basically, I mean, I myself, if I go to a website, I'm always looking for news, and
Right.
say 50% of the time there's a nice little button that says news, and that's very easy for me. And the rest of the time it might be hidden under corporate or
Right.
some other places, resources. Is it something as simple as that, just understanding why different sets of people might come to your website and try to make that experience as easy for all of them, as opposed to
Absolutely.
just having one particular audience?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, I mean, in that example, in the simplest terms, it comes down to understanding your users, understanding how your users are using the applications, and then making sure that they don't have to think about it when they are using, right? And so there are a lot of things that development teams can do, from simple user testing that they're just running within their organizations, or within their development teams. Customer feedback loops. There are lots of different kinds of user testing. There's even one that it was fairly popular in the early 2000s called drunk UX, and people would actually pay a group of people to get slightly buzzed and test your website or your application. And the theory behind that was that if they could navigate and if they could use the site while they were slightly buzzed, then you probably were meeting the accessibility and requirements and user experience requirements for a standard able-bodied, for everybody, right? An able-bodied user as well. There are obviously some flaws in that theory is around, when you are slightly buzzed, does that impact it? But the idea behind it is right? That we want to make sure that we understand how difficult it is or easy it is for people to navigate and use the technology that we have out there. There's a great book by Stephen Krug called Don't Make Me Think, super short, but I think everybody should read it, whether they're in marketing or in development, because it really talks about making sure that your applications and your websites are as intuitive as possible.
Yeah, and in terms of the ways of improving and getting better at human-centered software, so you've sort of outlined some of it there, I think, in terms of obviously getting feedback stuff. Are there any other sort of must-dos in terms of making those improvements?
Yeah, absolutely. I think looking at things like being very objective in your review of the software, so doing the user testing, but also looking at it with an honest eye, and understanding what might be missing. I think there are basic accessibility features that you can add, whether it's dark mode, whether it's even using alt text for your images, making sure that your applications or websites are compatible with screen readers. Those are the kinds of things that are going to make that site accessible for everybody, right? And the interesting thing is, when we think of accessibility, I think the first thing a lot of people think about is somebody who has a permanent disability, right? That they're blind, or that they are missing a limb, or they have cognitive function impairments. But every single person at some point in their life will experience some sort of disability, right? You could be somebody who has a broken arm, right? And you're trying to fill out a form on a website because you need to have some, complete some sort of action. You might need to have more time to fill out that form. You might be a parent who's holding a child while trying to complete a function within that. And so thinking about all of the use cases, really understanding your persona, and this goes back to this human side of software, right? And the human centricity of what we're doing, truly understanding the people who are using your software is key to understanding how to make it better and how to make it something that they actually can and will engage with.
Okay. And some of the good news from this survey is that I believe most of the organizations you talk to are at least planning to up their investment in terms of action. So that's
Right.
That's good news. But again, you referred to it earlier, retrofitting can be problematic, as opposed to obviously starting with a blank, well, I say blank sheet of paper, a blank computer screen before you start programming. And also, I believe there's a bit of confusion in terms of the tools and processes. So sorry, that's quite a complicated scenario, but if you can sort of unpick that, that'd be grateful. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of training is absolutely needed, right? I think there's a lack of understanding of what accessibility features should be included in a website or an application. Training on the requirements. There obviously, again, there are regulatory issues that people have to comply with, developers have to comply with across the world, right? And when we start thinking about the fact that applications and websites are typically global in nature, understanding each one of those regulations and making sure that you are building for that and complying with those. But it really comes down to training, I think, and helping understand, you know, and that's for people who may need to retrofit, may need to go back and look at a legacy application. I think we also need to make sure that we are thinking about development with an accessibility first mindset to begin with, right? So as we're training young developers, making sure that they're fully aware of the need for accessibility, the need for inclusivity in their applications. It makes them more scalable, it makes them more usable, you know, all of those other things. But if you're thinking about it from the get-go, then obviously it makes things 1,000 times easier. So, you know, that's a very long way of saying it's training today, it's training for tomorrow, it's understanding compliance and regulations. And I think it's understanding, it still comes back to understanding your audience, right? And making sure that that is a priority when we're thinking about, as technologists, we get really geeked out about the technology, right? We're excited about this new, you know, we're excited about generative AI, we're excited about, you know, new front-end frameworks, we're excited about, you know, different kinds of development features. None of that matters if you're not thinking about the user, right? And so I think putting that back in, putting the humans back into the development and the people who are going to use your software is going to make your application stand out head and shoulders above the rest.
And presumably as well, you've got to put up some thought into the, you know, the device which people are going to use to access, because again, even, I mean, surprising the amount of websites, for example, that don't properly load, you know, depending on what kind of device, you know, on your mobile phone, it might be fine and not on your PC or vice versa.
Right.
So that's another part of trying to
absolutely. And when you think, you know, going back to the idea that our reliance on technology has only increased since the pandemic, right? Users are expecting connected experiences that just work, right? Whether you know, I'm getting ready to get on a plane later today. I want to make sure that my phone, checking in on my phone gives me the same experience, you know, when I get to the airport and check a bag, to when I'm checking something on my desktop application. You know, all of that, when I'm looking at the kiosks and the screens and all of those things, users expect that to be connected. And so that level of reliance has also created a higher level of sophistication from the users. And so we, as people who are creating those digital experiences, have to be thinking about all of that, right? And one interesting thing is, you may have a team that is, one team is responsible for the web, one team is responsible for the mobile application. So having that cross-functional alignment within your development teams is super, super important as well. And so making sure that everybody has this accessibility first mindset is, that's where the money is, right? That's where you need, you know, that's where you're going to really start seeing experiences that people want to engage with. And if people are using, again, if they're using your digital experiences, you know, whether that's on a phone or even a watch or anything else, that's when they're going to engage more with your business, and ultimately, you know, that's higher revenue at the end of the day.
And is it ever acceptable? I mean, clearly everyone wants to try and be sort of everything to everyone, I guess, in all scenarios, but do occasionally you have to accept that there are, you know, sort of extreme examples where you just won't be able to sort of provide the full-on experience, but at least if you can compromise and give people the important bits. I've just thoughts as to how much, I suppose, people should beat themselves up or not if they don't think they can, you know, cover all the bases.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think that we should always be striving to be better, right? And we always want to be better. I think that, again, in the example that I shared with my daughter's school, it's great that they were even thinking in that direction, that they were going to make that. I think when you see something not working, you look at and to see how you can improve it. What can you do? And thinking even of all use cases, right? There are some instances where you might think, for my persona, this is a fringe case, right? There are only a few people who are going to be impacted by this lack of feature or functionality, right? But I would encourage people to stop and think, hey, if I do fix that one thing, even if it's it's a fringe case or an edge case, can it have a ripple effect across the entire application? So I think starting by doing a very objective evaluation of your applications, where you're winning, where where maybe you have areas for improvement, getting some true customer feedback, right? So you're not just looking at it, in a bubble, that you're asking those folks, and then, prioritizing, creating a list and saying, this is what we can do today. This is what we can retrofit, because while retrofitting is challenging, it's not, there are scenarios where you can retrofit. And then thinking about, okay, we have this roadmap for the application, and we can't stop what we're doing. That's one of the big things is, hey, we have current development, how do we stop? But thinking about how can we weave this in over time, right? And probably the biggest thing that will be probably one of the biggest drivers for a lot of people will be the regulatory compliance, right? Because there are fines associated with that and things like that. So as you're looking at those, it's like anything. Like, yes, in an ideal world, we would all have these beautifully written applications and digital experiences from the word go. But, taking it in small chunks and seeing what you can do and what's going to make the biggest impact without hurting the business, from a roadmap perspective, is definitely a good start.
And I'm wondering as well, how much should the folks looking at the software design side of things also have in mind sort of connectivity and the IT infrastructure, which is along which this is going to be, served, transported, whatever. I guess
Right.
both, within the organization, so knowing that you've got enough, IT firepower, if you like, to stand up the website that's been designed, and also, again, you obviously can't know, but trying to give the best experience for users where they might not have 4G, if you like, it might only be 3G or whatever.
Right.
How much of a responsibility do you have within the software to sort of design it for the, if you like, the lowest common denominator of connectivity,
Right.
opposed to the fastest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like with any software project, you're putting together your requirements, you put together, and you prioritize, right? So I think, yes, if you have, and again, understanding your persona, understanding if, the majority of your customers do need to use your app in a connected area, but they might have service drop, right? What can that experience look like? Again, you understanding the persona, understanding the objective and how the application is being used allows you to then prioritize. And it all goes back to, how can you make the biggest impact? And then you have a roadmap for, these are features that we would add down the road, or this is what we, but you want to make sure that your application or website can be used by the largest number of your persona, right? So catering to that group.
Yeah, and I guess given with that, you sometimes just have to make a decision as to when you end supporting a particular version of whatever it is, or you might offer the opportunity for someone to access an older version if that helps them, get to where they want quicker. But you can't sort of be all things to all people in terms of constantly supporting somebody who's on a 20-year-old BlackBerry. I don't know, because then you just have to accept that they're not going to have a great experience.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think, user testing isn't just when you roll out the application. I think user testing is something you should be looking at and thinking about throughout the life cycle of the application, right? Because you might uncover that either, users are having a problem using the application in, low, in areas where they have less, connection to Wi-Fi, or you might find out that they're using your application for something completely different, right? And by understanding that over time, you can then optimize for their scenario or the key scenarios. A good example of that, it would be, I believe it was rapid transit in the Boston area, where the developers realized that people were actually using the application to better understand weather, because it would tell them when there was a weather delay, right? So they were looking at to check weather as opposed to going to a weather application, right? So is there something they can do to optimize for that and cater to their audience and help them use that application for both what they intended it for, but also how it's being used by the customer. And again, that goes back to, that helps you prioritize roadmaps, it helps you understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and then you can build in new features and functionality to increase that stickiness of the application.
And when it comes to that, clearly if you learn things sort of later on, it's difficult. But when you're also designing, do you have one eye on what you might be adding back to this sort of retrofit thing? And so instead of, creating something and then go, oh, whoops, we should do this as well, and it's not easy. Should you be able to create the software so it's easy to add sort of, modules or, functions or whatever else? Is that
definitely you want to build for scalability. I think the interesting thing in this space, though, is that nobody has a crystal ball, right? And so we do know that over time, technology changes. There are, if you had said, I mean, again, I'm going to go back to AI because it's the topic du jour, but AI itself is not a new concept, right? I think it was 75 years ago it was first discussed theoretically at a conference at Dartmouth. It wasn't until the preview version of ChatGPT, was it 3, in December of 2022 that it blew up, right? And it democratized it. And it's changing fundamentally the way that businesses are looking at not just how they interact with their customers, but how they're interacting or how they're improving processes internally, right? And so you don't necessarily know. Nobody in January of 2022 would have said this is something we need to think about, but it absolutely is something that everybody has in the back of their mind in some capacity right now. So to the best of your ability, yes, you should be thinking about how can I make this scalable? How can I be thinking about application development for the future? And future proofing is something we like to say quite a bit. And you can do that by selecting the right kind of front end frameworks and front end technologies that hit that suit your needs today, but also have the ability to expand. And then when you start thinking about accessibility, understanding which frameworks may have lend themselves better to that kind of work, and what kind of tools and support you have in the ecosystem that actually also help you with that kind of growth.
Okay, we talked a lot about the topic human-centered software design. It'd be good to understand, obviously, from a progress point of view, where is it you fit within this landscape? What was it you bring to the party?
Yeah. So in the team or division that I work in, we have a number of ways that we support accessibility. On the developer tooling side of the business, we create and sell software UI components, front-end components. So think about grids, charts, graphs, anything down to a button, right? So a developer can bind their data to the back end, and they don't have to worry about the front end. We help them with that presentation layer. From an accessibility perspective, all of our components meet all of the current accessibility requirements. We have documentation to help developers better understand accessibility. We have a whole series of content on accessibility, lots and lots of articles that we've written. And we have regular live streams and things like that, where we're sharing with the development community what they should be thinking about and how they can actually practically apply accessibility in their world today. And so, that's probably the best example within the division that I work in, but everybody at Progress is thinking about from a development perspective, whether you're deploying, testing, or even creating the applications, how can we make sure that our customers are empowered to add accessibility features into their applications so that their end users are empowered.
Okay, so perhaps in sort of finishing, summarize is there one or two key bits of advice? I mean, I suspect a lot of people are somewhere on this journey, but as I think the surveys outline, they're maybe not getting to where they want to be. So any thoughts as to the one or two key things that people should take on board that will hopefully help them, get further down the road when it comes to human-centered?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, objectively review your applications, understand where you're hitting the mark and where you might need to have more work. I would talk to your users, understand how they're using your applications, understanding if there are areas that could be where you could provide a better user experience for them as well. And then I think upskill your employees, right? Making sure that your developers understand, and your development teams understand the importance of accessible and inclusive software development, why thinking about thinking beyond the technology and thinking about the people who are engaging with the technology. understand why that's important and what are some of the things that they can do easily, and look for that low-hanging fruit. To your point earlier, you know, retrofitting is a challenge. There might be some things that we can do. You know, start with what you can and then build a roadmap for to get you there down the road.
Okay, it's been fascinating to chat, some lovely insights into what's going on, and really appreciate your time, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate your time as well.
Thanks again.